because I think like if we were able to raise like honestly a proper round of funding like in 2019, 2020, the company might not exist now, because I don't know that we knew exactly what we were doing, and we probably would have just gone to shit.
In general, those deals from 2020, 2021 are not doing well.
Yeah. And I think like it's one thing to like not quite hit a milestone and need more money to raise a milestone. It's another to like have a failed clinical trial and then try to raise money, because very few people want it, and it's a much higher barrier to kind of come across.
Welcome to Austinpreneur, our show about the stories that made Austin, Texas a global hub for startups. The show is produced by Capital Factory and hosted by me, Nick Spiller. As a reminder, by joining Capital Factory, you can plug into the ecosystem where the stories on this show were set. Learn more about us at capitalfactory.com.
Who's listened to our podcast before? Here we go. Thank you. Check it out. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. Search Austinpreneur, search Capital Factory, smash the subscribe button, and listen. But you're here live. You're going to get to hear this episode first. Very exciting guest we have. Our guest is the founder and CEO of Senseye, which is an Austin-based AI diagnostics platform. It uses eye tracking computer vision to make mental health conditions more visible and treatable. David began his journey in science very early. He was selected in 2012 as one of the 100 Google Glass pioneers. So he's one of the first people to start developing on Google Glass, and he's a recipient of an Office of Naval Research Award for DNA computing research. And he built Senseye out of a high school science fair project. That's about the point I met David, and we invested through Capital Factory back in 2017 initially. Moved in here to Austin, and he's been crushing it. He's raised a lot of money. He sold his soul, according to the last panel. I own a little bit of it, but it's, we're still friends. He seems to like me. It seems to be working, and we're doing some badass shit. Senseye's work sits at the intersection of deep science, regulatory compliance, and real-world development, turning lab research into commercially viable product in a heavily regulated environment. In today's conversation, we'll dive into how to raise capital for ventures where milestones span lab results, regulatory standards, and real-world pilots, and how to design a capital stack that supports those long-term hard tech trajectories. In other words, how do you do something that's never been done before and expand the human envelope? So without further ado, let's welcome David Zakariaie from Senseye to the stage. Oh. Down. Thank you. Have a seat. Welcome. Don't block my logo.
I was paid a lot of money to get the Topo Chico logo into the show.
That's right. Well, they are one of our partners here. AC Ventures, shout out. All right, well, I'm gonna ask some questions. I've got some hard-hitting questions for David, but then we're gonna turn it over to y'all and hopefully have a good bit of time for Q&A. That's one of the hallmarks of the Capital Factory podcast, is it's really where the audience is a big part of the discussion, and we compete with all the other sessions that happen here at Capital Factory for leaving the most time for Q&A. But yeah, without further ado, David, let's just introduce us to Senseye, what you're working on, and then we're going to dive in from there on your fundraising journey.
Sounds great. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Done a couple of podcasts, never live, so this is going to be fun. But I'm David. I'm the CEO and founder of Senseye. We're a 22-person startup based here in Austin. Our office is literally across the street. And essentially, the problem that we're working on solving is the fact that within the mental health space, there's really no objective or accurate way to do anything whatsoever. The way that we kind of describe the current standard of care in behavioral health, the way that we diagnose and manage mental health patients is essentially the equivalent of diagnosing someone with diabetes but never measuring their blood sugar, which, as ridiculous as that sounds, is the way things work right now. As much as we talk about mental health as being this invisible thing, it's really not. There's been functional MRI after functional MRI study that has shown that, the way a PTSD brain versus a depressed brain versus a bipolar brain and so on and so forth respond to stimuli is actually very different. So there are objective and accurate ways to both diagnose mental health conditions as well as see how they're changing in response to different things. The issue is just that there's not a scalable and accessible way, of doing any of those things. And so what ends up happening in the real world, about 80% of all mental health is diagnosed and treated exclusively inside of primary care. And it's essentially the equivalent of you show up at a doctor's office, they ask you a couple of questions, on some sort of a patient self-reported questionnaire. It gets diagnosed as anxiety or depression. You get SSRI or an SSRI or Xanax. That's kind of the end of the road for the overwhelming majority of patients. And even if we want to suspend disbelief for a second and say that these patient self-reported questionnaires are 100% accurate, which they're not, but let's just say they are, the bigger issue is they can only screen for anxiety or depression. And so everyone ends up diagnosing positive for anxiety or depression. We have this big chronic anxiety and depression population that we think it's just getting worse and worse, where in reality, the overwhelming majority of that chronic anxiety and depression is undiagnosed or misdiagnosed something else. And so that's really the problem that we're looking to solve. And at our core, we're building the first diagnostic and severity monitoring platform for behavioral health. And our initial focus right now is on PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
Excellent. Well, noble mission, no doubt. Now walk us through your fundraising journey and, hit the high strokes of the various rounds you've raised, and just walk us through your fundraising journey. I remember you won the $100,000 Quit Your Job Challenge by Capital Factory. I know that was our first check, but like in your mind, talk us through. I know this is probably like never-ending fundraising journey, but lay the groundwork for us.
Yeah, so we just closed our Series A about 2 months ago. So I think I have a much better understanding now of how to raise money, of really how not to raise money. But we've the Senseye fundraising journey has been very long and very difficult for a couple of reasons. I think there's a lot of ways that Senseye doesn't look like any other tech company that kind of turns it off from a lot of kind of traditional software investors, because even though we are 100% software, the outcome in many ways is binary. It either gets FDA approved or not. And so a lot of traditional software investors don't like that. But we also haven't really fit the mold of a lot of the traditional medical device investors, because I'm not an MD, PhD, and our team looks more like a software team than it does a traditional medical device team. And also the amount of money that we have to raise to kind of get this across the line is a lot less than most medical devices, because it's 100% software. So we've I wouldn't say fundraise the way we fundraised, but I can obviously kind of talk about the way it worked. So we kind of, very early on, we did a small angel round, and that basically started from Capital Factory. So we got a $100,000 check from Capital Factory back in 2017. That ended up becoming part of a $2.5 million round that we did. And back then, the focus really wasn't on mental health yet. It was kind of on just trying to build the core technology and the platform behind what we were doing. And on a very simple level, the way the product works, it's essentially eye tracking. So it's about a 10-minute test on a mobile phone. We show different types of ocular stimuli on the screen while we videotape your eye's response to it, and then we can deliver a diagnosis and a severity score on the other side of that. And very little behind what we're doing is new from a scientific standpoint. Almost all of this has been known for 30, 40 years now. The problem has been you've traditionally needed a couple $100,000 worth of eye tracking equipment to make this work. And so our breakthrough is more that we've been able to use computer vision to do all this on a smartphone instead of a very large expensive eye tracker. So for the kind of early fundraising rounds, we were kind of trying to find deep tech investors that can kind of make the leap in their heads that if this works, it'll be really useful for something. But we didn't really know what it would be useful for. And so we raised kind of an initial, 2.5 million or so. And we started to kind of try and just chase different applications that we could find on the marketplace people had for eye tracking technology, to essentially try and get grants, to kind of continue the development of the core platform. And then our big break that then led to kind of unlocking actual fundraising. So in early 2018, back then we were kind of 4 people, and so we worked upstairs on the 16th floor. And I had kind of strategically positioned myself and became friends with a lot of the Capital Factory staff. And so whenever someone important was in the space, I got the opportunity to pitch Senseye to them. And there was an Air Force general who was here for a tour one day, who was the commander of the Air Education and Training Command for the Air Force. And he basically wanted to know if it was possible to use this to track a more objective way of understanding if student pilots are learning how to fly a particular task correctly, because his idea was if you can help us more objectively understand if people are learning, I can train to proficiency instead of a certain number of hours. And so like any good startup does, we said yes without having any idea that it was possible, and we would figure it out as we went along. And so that led to kind of a 2-year rather large Air Force contract that we got. And there were some things that we had to deliver to the Air Force that for the most part, it was kind of funding a lot of our kind of core R&D just to build out the eye tracking platform. And so throughout that, we got it from like a very expensive $10,000 large camera down to a form factor of like a pair of glasses you can wear inside of a flight simulator. And so off of the back of the Air Force contract, we kind of were able to raise like our first proper seed round. Capital Factory reinvested in that. A couple of like smaller venture capital funds invested in that as well. We kind of pulled together we put together about 8 million or so, I want to say. And we raised that on a safe. We were never ever really able to just pull a whole bunch of investors together, and so we just kind of we went as we could, and we had faith. Like there were
rolling
times
close.
Yeah, exactly, rolling close. There were times where we had like $2 in the bank account, but we had a good feeling an investor was going to close, and it just kind of worked out. Which $2 in your bank account is not so bad when you're only 2 or 3 people. It's a lot scarier when you're 20 people. We can talk about that later.
It gets way lower than $2.
It gets way lower. Yeah. You can go. I know a lot about how big of an overdraft the bank will actually let you do.
It's wild. Yeah, you can go pretty far down there.
Yeah. And then in early 2020, the technology was working. We got the science behind the eye tracking through a peer review. It was working on a phone. And then it became time to kind of figure out exactly what we wanted to apply the technology to. It was smack in the middle of COVID at that point. And so obviously, the subject of mental health was being talked about a lot. And there were 3 different things that happened on the commercial front that kind of led us to get to the decision that the mental health application is the one that we should kind of go after. And so at that point, we settled on that. We raised another round in kind of late 2020, early 2021. That was about $5.5 million that we raised from our existing investors, because for a couple of reasons, we just couldn't really attract much cash at that point. And then that led to our Series A that we raised we closed it about 2 months ago. It took us about 2.5 years to raise it, and I'm sure you can kind of tell me how much details kind of walk through that. But yeah, that's kind of been the overarching history, and we closed that Series A about 2 months ago, and is roughly $20 million.
Excellent. There's a few things I want to double click on there that's very important. When we first met David, there was no for sure that this was going to work. He was for sure about it, but he was a high school student, just graduated from high school, working on this, I distinctly remember saying that even if it doesn't work, this is the type of guy we want around here. Like, this is the type of thing we want to work on and go after. And by having something that's so ambitious And something that a lot of people would call bullshit on and say, that's not true, you can't do that. You're creating the mentality that is exciting for an investor, that can create the type of returns that are fit for VC funds. I think that was a big learning lesson for me early on. And yeah, I think it's worked. The government piece can't be understated. One, that Air Force visit was like the first time the Air Force came to Capital Factory, and they were looking for all this deep tech stuff, and we had like David to show them. So it just goes to being early.
AFWorks wasn't the thing back then. Like that, this was like all pre-AFWorks, pre any of the government stuff at Capital Factory.
That was right. Before Army Futures Command and any of this, David was really the first company that I think had a direct engagement. Maybe Firefly or some others, but that's a common denominator, and really it's almost. I mean, there's a lot of SaaS companies that raise money these days. We're not super hot on it here at Capital Factory. It's these deep tech companies that we think are very exciting. And, some other, Senseye is one of them, Aptronic, Soronic, Colossal. These are all unicorns that are here in Texas in our portfolio. These are exciting things. These are hard problems. Pretty much all of them, they augment their financing strategy with non-dilutive capital. It's a very important piece, and it really makes it attractive to investors. It's usually not the government coming in and saying, I'm going to fund this ultimate platform that's going to be a $1 billion, $1 trillion product. It's more your technology aligns with the capability roadmap they're going after, and they can fund a part of it, a component of your system, or they can fund some tests that get you data that you need. And then you piece a few of those government contracts together, and all of a sudden you've really chopped off some technical risk of the ultimate platform you're trying to raise money for. And then that's very attractive to investors. And then there's also later stage programs where we're putting in a lot of money, largely because we know if we go put $800 million into Soronic, and the U.S. Navy is looking for a big new shipbuilding company that's got a lot of advanced tech. Like there's no other company that has advanced shipbuilding with $800 million in their bank. Like that's a great, not for sure, but like a pretty good chance they're going to get that business. So I think that's another key piece of this conversation is just, being able to, align, and sometimes you got to zig and zag to accomplish these early stage deep tech milestones, because it's really hard for like an angel investor and a lot of seed funds where it's like, I got to raise even a relatively small amount. He's raised $30-40 million. It's still like that's a pretty big risk to take as an investor. So if you're able to get some of the government funding to de-risk that, I think it helps a lot. All right, moving along. I mean, what were your breakthroughs from a narrative standpoint to investors? I mean, I know there was a lot of investors we probably put you in front of that just didn't get it, and maybe they weren't the right fit. But when you're pitching this big moonshot vision, back when it was not nearly as common to hear a pitch like this in Austin, what ended up working in your memory to get some of those early seed, any other early investors or even the Series A investors?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it's two separate answers for the different groups. What ended up helping very early on was actually kind of, and I think a big part of it was because of the investors that we were pitching. And if I knew what I knew now, I think we would have gone after different investors. But we really didn't focus, it started working when we stopped focusing on the science of the technology, and just kind of would tell them that we can prove to them it works in due diligence if we got to that point, and just really focus the pitch like a typical software pitch of talking about the market and the application and how much revenue we can make and all of that. And that early on that seemed to work. I think what really helped us on the later stage of our financing, so our Series A, the last kind of 2.5 years, So I'll get back. When we first kind of started to raise the Series A, there were a couple issues we were running into, some with what we're doing and some just kind of general dynamics in the market. The mental health space, if I was really smart, we would have raised a giant round during COVID, because there were many companies in the mental health space that raised a lot of money during COVID. and most of them don't exist anymore. And part of the problem, there were kind of two categories of companies. There were a large number that were doing telehealth, and there was nothing new or unique. It was just kind of, there were a couple hundred telehealth specifically for mental health companies or for mental health conditions that got funded in that time. And a lot of the larger VCs that had backed them were just kind of turned off to the category because they'd support a whole bunch of money, and at the height of COVID at ridiculous valuations, and a lot of them just did not exist. And granted, there were many spaces that the same thing happened in, but that was kind of one issue. And then there were 2.5 years ago, there were roughly 40 companies that were trying to do mental health, not diagnostics, but trying to quantify mental health in some way, shape, or form. Of that 40, there's 2 of them that are left. And I have a lot of opinions, obviously, on why what they were trying did not work. But that was the other issue is everyone else was kind of convinced that they can build some sort of a screening tool instead of a diagnostic and not take it through FDA. And a lot of investors were excited about that because they could be on the market, 12 months. We were saying we're kind of 4 or 5 years because we got to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Cutting corners.
Trials. Yeah. And the thing is, it's not, if there was a market demand for it, it's not really cutting corners, right? Because but what we were very convinced, and it started as a gut feeling, and now we've kind of validated it, that because there's nothing in this space right now, the only way to actually change the clinical journey of patients, and by that the outcomes of patients, is to establish a real gold standard. And the only gold standard in this space is FDA approval, and FDA approval with the word diagnostic, not as a screening tool or a support tool or something like that. And so we were very, very stuck and immovable on that. And so raising money was it's a lot harder to raise money saying you're going to build a diagnostic when you have no data versus 6 months ago when we finished our phase, so we finished our phase 1 2 years ago, our phase 2 roughly 6 months ago, and now we're starting our phase 3. And so as we got more and more data proving that the science and technology was working, proving that the FDA was receptive to what we were trying to do, and then there's really no analog to what we're doing in the commercial world, which in a lot of spaces, including in ours, and in a lot of spaces is very exciting because there really is no competitor. But the way the healthcare world works, your customer and who's paying is different because our customers are the providers, they're the providers in the health systems, but the insurance companies are paying for it ultimately. And when you do anything new in the insurance world, there's no CPT code, and so there's a whole other process to actually get payment in place. And so as we've kind of been able to slowly tackle milestones along that, that's kind of what has assisted us. But we haven't really, I wouldn't call Capital Factory a traditional VC, and the couple of other VC investors we have, VC, I wouldn't really call VCs as well. We ultimately have never been able to kind of crack the code and make Senseye fit the boxes that a VC has wanted to raise, and so or would want to see to invest. And so most of the money we've raised has either been from non-traditional VCs. This last round we did, our Series A, was led by a large corporation where they're kind of us working helps their a business that they're trying to build, and so there was kind of a lot of strategic alignment there. Or we also found a lot of success with high net worth individuals and family offices, because a lot of the questions that we get from VCs was kind of prove to me that doctors actually are going to use this and this and that. But if you either yourself or you've had a kid who's gone to rehab or has any type of a serious mental health issue, you might not know exactly how to fix it, but you very strongly have seen firsthand what needs to happen to kind of change the mental health system. And so we found a lot of success with those types of investors. And I know it sounds very morbid, but I literally had done a ChatGPT search, rich people with mental health issues, and that became our target list, and we went after it that way. And it sounds very weird, but there was very obvious alignment of anyone that has firsthand experience with this system is going to understand the problem, and that seemed to work really well for us.
So, as Gordon says, hyper intersected investors in your space. So we're going to open it up for questions in a second. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Nicole will bring the mic around. But I would just rephrase what you said, around the breakthrough, and it's something I've seen a lot of, and it's one thing to have the vision for a great product, and that will get attention. The other key thing that maybe isn't that I see missing more often from a founder's vision is the go-to-market strategy, right? And it's like, what's your creative approach that's going to allow you to bring this to life? With David, it was becoming the gold standard, getting FDA approved, and really sticking to that approach. And that's something that is very important. One, because obviously you need to kind of know how you're going to do it. But two, it needs to be creative in the sense that, like, if Elon wants to compete with you, you can still win, right? Or it's defensible. It's something that when you are successful, people are going to come after you, and they're going to try to take your market share inevitably. And you need to have this way to enter the market and kind of lock the door behind you. I think that's a key piece. So it's not just like, what are you going to do? It's like, what's your creative approach that's somehow like special to your unique advantage, your unfair advantage, that allows you to become successful. So who has a question for David? Or who's got the mic, actually? All right, great.
I just wanted to say you're really inspiring and super incredible what you've done, and congratulations on all your hard work. I think it's a super important space that you're in, and appreciate you being here. I just wanted to know, how are you incorporated? And also, do you have nonprofit status? Because you had mentioned grants, and I thought that was really interesting because I'm also thinking in that space of going both Delaware PBC and having a branch of nonprofit. And also, did you had VCs? Yes, but it wasn't all angel investment. I'm sorry.
A couple, yeah.
The quasi VCs, maybe not like total traditional VCs, but.
So are mission-aligned VCs, do they really exist where it's not just about the revenue, but also the mission alignment? And did you experience that in all of your investments where they care just as much about the mission as much as the revenue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll move backwards, I think. So in terms so I think there are certainly a lot of VCs that like are mission aligned. I think in my experience, and there's one that's invested in Senseye. I think in my experience, they are like, it is true, they can be equally invested in the mission, however they choose to define it, as they are in the in the commercial and return side of things. But what they're expecting on the commercial front is not any different than they would expect if they were not mission aligned. So like a mission alignment kind of is more of like their thesis, but their LPs are still expecting them to deliver a return the same way like any of the other funds that they're invested in would. And so like the one mission aligned VC that we have, the founder had a very public bipolar episode. And so he started this whole fund, and all they were investing in at that point like is mental health. He's had to expand since then, only because there aren't that many quality mental health deals, in his words, and so he's had to kind of expand to other types of investments as well. But yeah, like the fact that we were mission aligned got us in the door, but like his due diligence, both like in science and the kind of like underwriting that they did, was I think the same as kind of like any other fund. He still wanted a 10x, 100x return and all of that good stuff. In terms of your first question, we're a Delaware C Corp, like just the all the standard vanilla stuff. For the government grants that we've gone after, corporations are eligible. There's certain grants that we've had to go after where like at least 30% of the work needs to be done. By a nonprofit, and so we've either partnered with like a traditional nonprofit or partnered with like a with a academic institution. But yeah, we're just a Delaware C Corp.
So mental health is a huge issue for space travel, and I mean, mental health is one of the priorities that NASA is trying to resolve. So for those of you that don't follow space, they have fake space trips, and they go and pretend to be in space. And so the analog astronauts actually have had scuffles and things like that. Obviously, you don't want people fighting in space. But so NASA was not on your radar, or is that like a new information for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not new information, but with the exception of the Air Force, and this is changing slowly, but all of the SBIR and STTRs are topic specific. So you can only really propose something if there's a topic for it. And so, yeah, in all the ones that we've seen from NASA, there has not been like a mental health topic that we've been able to apply to. But if there was, yeah, we certainly would be interested.
Hi, you've clearly got a number of different investors and VCs involved. How are you or they defining success with Senseye? You know, obviously coming in at different stages. Some are going to be looking for revenue. Some are going to be looking for FDA approval. You know, how do you manage all those different, success metrics that they are looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say, obviously the time horizon is slightly different for some of them just based on when they invested. But I think they all define success the same, which is they would like an exit for the company at kind of 30 to 100x what it was when they invested. And like for us to kind of get to that point, it's kind of FDA approval and then a certain level of revenue after that. And so actually, like I think we are pretty well aligned with all of our investors. Exactly when we would look for an exit and this and that is not really a conversation we're even kind of having right now. So we're expecting, if everything goes well, we can get FDA approved on a full diagnostic towards the end of next year. It's just kind of most likely from a timeline standpoint, and then there's probably kind of 5 years of work on the other side of that before that type of exit's possible. Just because like in healthcare, you get FDA approval, there's then a whole bunch of other nonsense you have to work through for kind of to get to kind of the type of revenue numbers we would want to see. But yeah, I think everyone's kind of on the same page of FDA approval, start to generate a large amount of revenue, and then kind of exit after that.
Thanks so much. Really awesome what you've done. Just question on the professional and technical legitimacy that you had to build at the beginning. Did you do that primarily from other team members, co-founder, advisors? As you said, straddling software and medtech is difficult. You're not MD, PhD from Harvard or something. So what was your strategy there, and how did you build that in the early stages?
Yeah, so we did two things. Before we started any of like our clinical trials or anything, we did build a medical advisory board. And we kind of reached out to like all the top professors in the psychiatry space. And we got very lucky that there aren't like, unlike, cardiology and like a lot of other areas, they're not really getting contacted every day for like, companies that are working on things. And so we were actually like, it was relatively easy to put that board together. Like the top psychiatrists in the country, if you, depending on the Google search, you're the number one or two. It's a guy named Dr. Charles Nemiroff, who's the endowed psychiatry chair here at UT Austin. He was at Emory before that, Miami, Duke, a whole bunch of places. He's been doing this so long that the psychiatry chair at Harvard Medical School is his former student. Like, so you can imagine he's an older guy. But we just kind of cold emailed him. We got on a call with him. He ripped us apart for 25 minutes, and at the end was like, "But okay, like I'll do your advisory board for you." And then he helped us kind of like craft the rest of it together. And then when we actually started our trials, we found like who the best investigators and scientists are in the space, and we kind of we did our best to convince them to be the like investigators in our trials. And so at this point, that like we like our phase 1 trial was 68 patients. Our phase 2 was roughly 750. We have done like a big machine learning training study that is wrapping up right now, but when it's done, it'll be about 13,000 patients. And then we're running a 2,500 patient phase 3. And so the fact that we have studies of that size now with like from a publication standpoint, they're like our brand name investigator names on them. That's kind of like where a lot of our credibility in the scientific world is coming from now.
It's an interesting idea having software teams approach medical problems. It's something I think a lot of our most interesting companies in healthcare are doing, and it's like a bit of a leapfrog approach. So it's interesting. I mean, one Unamas. All right, Madeline. Hi, Madeline.
So David, you shared with us that it was difficult to raise traditional VC early on. You're doing something truly novel. The lane that you're in has a high regulatory hurdle. It's a long time to market. And Nick already mentioned you leveraged non-dilutive capital, but you also found a different application to generate revenue. So a different application of your tech to generate some revenue along the way. I guess kind of a hypothetical question. That may have taken some focus of the team to work on those different projects or different applications, but you own more of your company, of the equity currently. What do you think your trajectory would look like? What would be different had you been able to raise traditional venture earlier, easier?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think if we were, it's a mixed bag. Because I think like if we were able to raise like honestly a proper round of funding like in 2019, 2020, the company might not exist now because I don't know that we knew exactly what we were doing, and we probably would have just gone to shit.
In general, those deals from 2020, 2021 are not doing well.
Yeah, and I think like it's one thing like. It's one thing to like not quite hit a milestone and need more money to raise a milestone. It's another to like have a failed clinical trial and then try to raise money because very few people want it, and it's a much higher barrier to kind of come across. So if we knew what we were doing and we were able to raise a proper round, like I think we could be at like we probably could have been FDA approved 18 to 24 months ago. Because the biggest thing that not being able to raise money delayed was like our clinical trials, and we did them in a much slower manner. We started them a lot late. We started them a lot later than we kind of planned to. But yeah, I think that the journey. I mean, we still have a long way to go to like success, but I think the journey has kind of worked itself out a bit.
Cool. Everyone, join me in thanking David for coming on the Capital Factory podcast. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Austinpreneur. Don't forget to check out capitalfactory.com to learn more about us and join our community. If you have thoughts about the show or ideas on how we can work together, reach out to me directly via email, nickspiller@capitalfactory.com. Shout out to the Capital Factory Dream Team for making this podcast possible, and special thanks to Aaron Handworker, who masterfully recorded and edited the show. Come back next week for a whole new episode.